have put together this data which actually looks at how the carbon budget has been appropriated or misappropriated between 1850 to 2011. If you take the United States, which I particularly want to point out here because it is a country which has come out with all flags rearing in this COP saying that it is the climate change leader, it is one country which has appropriated 21% of the carbon budget between 1850 to 2011. And that is the past. The question is, what do we do in the future?
And thank you for joining us on this very warm Tuesday night. Tonight, the heat is on across much of the country as the scorching hot summer grips the nation. Brutal and dangerous temperatures are being felt from California to Massachusetts. More than 120 million Americans are under excessive heat warnings or advisories, with triple-digit temperatures expected from the Great Plains to the lower Mississippi Valley.
We really have to sit on these climate skeptics who have no respect for the truth represented by science. I seem to be pointing the finger at the United States. My negotiations from representing the British government in the climate negotiations with countries around the world, what was actually the most difficult country was the United States throughout all that period.
Language put forward by 5 billion people, 138 countries, it disappeared because one country, the United States, didn't want it. And the COP26 presidency just bent to their demand.
In this ClimateGenn episode, I speak with Lieutenant General Norman Seip, the president of the American Security Project, about the urgency for the US Senate to stop playing dice with the global climate and vote through policy that will steer America back on course to being a nation worthy of respect. Ever since President George Bush Sr. declared the American way of life is not up for negotiation, the United States has stood in the way of global efforts to limit the impacts of climate destruction. We are now unnecessarily gambling our collective futures away because US politicians put wealth and ideology above the endless warnings of climate scientists, ecologists, among many others now screaming for change to avert disaster. It is late in the day and we are all now at risk from business as usual policy and investment that prolongs the use of fossil fuels. Changing now could avert some suffering, and as we discuss here, the United States must grow up and face its responsibility as the world's largest emitter. In the next episode, I speak with Dr. Lisa Seipe from the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford about avoiding maladaptation when we invest in resilience building around the world. Thanks for listening to ClimateGenn. You can get episodes early by backing the channel on patreon.com or subscribe for free on YouTube or any of the main podcast channels. Thank you very much. Lieutenant General Norman Seip, and you're the president of the American Security Project. Thank you very much for speaking to me today. We're going to talk very much about the situation in America now regarding legislation for climate action. And we're all seeing this all over the world now. We're seeing a worsening of heat waves, catastrophic impacts. These are all happening as we speak. And given the warning from scientists in the 1980s, and even throughout the last decade at least, the US military has been citing climate changes as a major threat. What do you think's held up the legislation and investment so far?
Well, as usual, Nick, it's politics. We've got a left and a right that seem to be further apart than in previous years. So it's tough to have a meaningful conversation, and it's tough to look at the facts as facts and not put political slants to them. You know, the House, as you know, has done their part, and they've passed over $555 billion in critical climate investments. And not to get ahead of you, but what we're asking for is for the Senate to do the same. And that's take meaningful action, pass the bill, start debating it, put our country on a path to reduce our carbon pollution that drives climate change, that jeopardizes our health, our environment, and our economy and national security by getting this bill passed. And I would tell you that we're past admiring the problem. The scientists have come back, 97% of them, and said this is real. All we have to do is look at the weather map and see how we're suffering across our own nation there. And climate change and all that comes with it is not a spectator sport. It's an all hands on deck. And if we're going to solve America's climate change problems, as well as those of the world, we've got to get into the game.
There's also this risk now that it's so late because all the action we're taking is becoming reactive because these impacts are happening. It's making it harder to build resilience and adapt effectively. I mean, do you think that there is a sense now that we're being forced onto the back foot with a lot of our efforts?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Budgets are budgets. Now we've got to split the money between resiliency and mitigation and with other proactive type of activities we need to do to actually arrest the warming trends that we're seeing across the world there. So we are not in the best position. That being said, we certainly don't want to throw our hands up and just succumb and just hope for the best. We need to, take this seriously and look for areas where we can get, so to speak, quick wins and find others where we can put some money toward other places like mitigation while we're working through some of the problems out there that don't need immediate dollars or action on our part.
You've had an extensive military career, so you understand quite a bit about risk. If you were asked to give your point of view to the Senate who are considering this, what would your direct words be to them?
Well, in the military, we talk about low, moderate, and extreme risk. And I would tell you that we are bordering on extreme risk. We've got to get going. We can't wait to be 100% sure on everything because we'll be even more late to need there. You just take a look at the impact on our national security with the destruction of infrastructure, our environmental security, our economic security, as well as our national security are all being impacted. And that will impact our way of life. And certainly no one wants to have our way of life impacted the way it could be with climate risk.
What's the risk that the Senate could actually derail these plans for climate legislation?
I think the risk is, based on you see the discourse that we have in our country on our discussions of getting after these problems, I think it's pretty high within our federal government. I'm seeing better progress in our states who feel the impacts much easier and much more severely than those that are sitting there up on the Hill in Washington, D.C. So I'm concerned about the Senate and the federal type of legislation that we need. I'm less concerned as far as the states taking action because of the fact that they are so closely impacted. And from a military standpoint, almost every state has some type of military installation in their confines of their borders there that are feeling the risk of climate change, particularly when it comes to training and being ready for any mission that our soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and guardians may be asked to do.
It sounds like, from what you're saying, and I've heard this before, that at the state level, you see a lot of progress, and even at the city levels, you're seeing a lot of progress. And at the federal level, you get these sort of log jams. And is there a feeling that the federal level is becoming dysfunctional because of the state of politics in the US?
I'll only speak for myself, but yes, I'm with other nonprofits that work other type of issues. And we see the fact that, again, we make better progress at the local and state levels than we do at the federal level. That's a sad state of affairs because it's all about having a civil discourse or civil conversations. And instead of increasing our volume of our words, which we seem to do now, we ought to be increasing the value of our words so that we can get after the problem sets and put good resources and good ideas against the problems out there. The whole idea about this clean energy, whether it's wind, solar, or other renewable sources, who can be against homegrown type of industry that creates good paying jobs, not subject to the wild fluctuations of the global fossil fuel markets. And clean energy certainly takes away President Putin's ability, and other autocratic leaders out there from weaponizing oil that we're seeing being done right now. So to me, it's a win-win-win from a military standpoint. It's almost a trifecta because we're basically being able to get after the mission, we'll be able to better save our infrastructure in there, and we'll be able to better take care of that economic, environmental, and national security impacts. Over.
Well, I mean, everything you've just said, it's impossible to disagree with from where we are in the world. And it's just that in many respects, the US and the global economy is based on a carbon economy. It's based on this fossil fuel sort of economy. And the US is still emitting colossal amounts of per capita CO2. I think it's like 15.5 tons per person, which is I mean, I know there's a great wealth discrepancies there, but that's 3 times the global average. Is it not the case that the security risk is not just to the United States, but it's also that in many respects, the United States is a security risk to the rest of the world if they don't get on board with what you're talking about?
Well, you're absolutely right. We need to be in the lead. We can either write the history books about climate change and what was done about it, or we can be written about by others there. And for our own economy and for our own way of life, taking the lead on these type of issues, as well as putting the money and resources against them in a sustained manner, not just from administration to administration or vote to vote, but for the long term there, that's the best way to go. And I wish we could wish our way out of this, but the fact of the matter is we have to roll up our sleeves and get after it and try to build consensus among members, whether it be at the federal level all the way down to the state level. Giving up is just not an option, as well as defeat is not an option for the world and for those that are going to come to live on it long after you and I are gone.
You're giving a very frank assessment, and we talk about the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable can be in your country. There's certainly a lot more around the mid-latitudes of the planet. But is there a sense of morality now when you talk about future generations? You talk about even the next generation, and in some respects, in our own lives, we're now seeing these devastating and catastrophic impacts. What do you make of this moral case for now getting the hell off fossil fuels and transitioning at whatever rapid speed we can?
Well, I hope the youngest generation right now can organize themselves better than what my generation is doing or hasn't done in order to beat that drum. It's got to be a steady drum beat, whether it's in the background or in the forefront on the issues that we're facing and that they're facing early in their lifetime that are going to only continue to be exacerbated as time goes on. So I'm applauding any and all efforts by Generation Z and others out there to make the world pay attention, make our leaders pay attention, and hopefully they will provide the leaders in the future that will get after this problem. Hopefully we're not too late. And I realize I said hopefully 3 or 4 times, and as all of us know, hope is not a course of action.
Yeah, the young activists have certainly brought this to the attention of everybody, really. I mean, there's been an acceleration in the last 5 to 10 years, I think. Can you end by outlining what you would regard as a realistic vision for the next decade for the US on climate action policy, but also delivery?
Well, you can just take a look at something like electric vehicles, where our transportation accounts for 30% of the national greenhouse gas emissions. So even if we can start making a big bit into that, or a big bite into that, that ought to set us up. Executive directives, that we can get from whatever president's in place when we can't get the folks on the Hill to come to agreement there. And then putting sustained money and effort against these type of activities will be important. The start-stop is not going to serve us well. It will not serve as a good example to those out there that are looking for leadership, looking for someone to take the lead, and looking for dedicated commitment.
Well, Norman, it's been great to speak to you. Thank you very much. I hope this whole thing comes through. It sounds like it's not just for the US. I mean, it reaches far beyond your borders. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Nick, and I appreciate the time that you gave me today.
Thanks again for listening. If you are interested to help support this series and help expand the discussion around climate topics, then please do consider backing my channel via Patreon. It will help me produce more content, and you will also gain access to more expert interviews. It would be great to engage more with audiences too and understand your views on these topics.